Understanding different education systems across the world is an extremely key part of choosing your dream university or making your dream university list, because all these education systems kind of change through whether it's like their length, the style of teaching, the flexibility of the programs, and all of these factors need to be considered before making a final decision on where you'll be heading. And the first education system that I want to explore is the one in the United States, because frankly, I think that's the most interesting education system to explore. And I've always been very fascinated in, doing research about it and understanding more about what the United States holds in terms of tertiary education. Starting off, there are 4 types of educational institutions in the United States of America. The first and the most common kind of institution that we speak about would be the private or non-profit institution. Those institutions basically provide either a graduate or non-undergraduate form of a degree, and that basically covers like your bachelor's or your master's. And these universities are extremely academic and they're extremely research oriented, and they generally produce like the most like spoken about research in the academic world generally, if that makes sense. And just to give you an example, that will be like Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and those are the kind of like the generic universities that you hear about on a day-to-day basis or in your house would fall under the category of a private university. The second type of institution would be the state universities or the state colleges and whatnot. And these are universities that are funded and founded by the respective state they're in, and therefore they result in relatively less costs for the students that want to enter these universities. I think the biggest difference is seen by domestic students. I think even for international students you see like a 20k kind of drop off. But one thing to note about schools in the United States, especially the ones in the higher kind of like top tier leagues, they tend to be relatively expensive even if they are state schools. And we should speak about how to kind of get over that or get kind of rid of that, but that's something to keep in mind for sure. And the general examples that come to mind would be UCLA, UCB, so Berkeley, Maryland, and schools like that. And even these schools tend to be extremely competitive, and they're in no way less than private institutions. That it's just that the nature of how they've been set up is different, and therefore they are categorized differently. The third type to kind of note would be the liberal arts colleges. So they follow the liberal arts curriculum extremely strictly, and they are much smaller in size. So like they have like a lower rate of admission in the sense that like the class sizes are smaller. So you get, I guess, 1,000 or 2,000 people in like a liberal arts school. Another thing with liberal arts colleges is that they have a lower student to faculty ratio. That means the class sizes are smaller, and the professors would have a larger chance of knowing their students much more personally and their work much more personally. So one thing I heard from a lot of people who go to liberal arts colleges is that they know their professors extremely personally. Almost all of them, they have them on their LinkedIns, and they can reach them very easily. So there is much more like personalized attention in these colleges. But something to note is that they are for your undergraduate education and not for your graduate education generally, because that's more of a learning experience for people to kind of like figure themselves out, which I will get to later. The fourth type to know is community colleges, and these schools are generally give you like a associate degree, and they also have like the technical and vocational programs within like community colleges. And some people use community colleges as a pathway to get into a 4-year degree, and community colleges are considered like a relatively cheaper option, and they have a much more easier kind of like admission processes. So like people kind of have a less barrier to enter to something like a community college. But yeah, those are the 4 types of institutions to keep in mind, and you can do much further research into it to know more about it. Now I would like to speak about the degree structure, the systems that are followed in the United States, and just to give you a bit more information about how your academic kind of experience would go. So there are 2 types of systems that are generally followed by larger universities in the US. And the first one would be the semester system, and that's something I think a lot of people are familiar with. And the second is the quarter system. So in semester system, the entire year is broken down into 2. That's generally like a fall and a winter term. And each term will be about 13 to 14 weeks, and you'll have like a summer break in between. where some people might take summer classes, but it's generally like students don't stay in school full time, if that makes sense. And and that's basically an academic term, and you do about 4 rounds of that to finish a 4-year degree. And the second would be the quarter system, and this is a relatively interesting system to kind of like explore. So these institutions or universities that follow the quarter system, so for example Stanford, Dartmouth, Brown, I believe, they all follow the quarter system, and they have either 3 to 4 quarters including like summer, and each quarter is like 10 to 11 weeks or 10 to 12 weeks, I believe. That's generally how your terms will be structured in each school, and that's a good heads up to have, because then you know how to plan your time if you get into a respective school, and then you know how to kind of like make a decision on that according to what kind of schedule you want to have in your university career. The next kind of segment we go to is how you are graded and how you reach the completion of your degree in a United States kind of education system. So how it works is that every time you do a course, you get a certain number of credits, and a course generally, for example at McGill, if you do one course, you get 3 credits, and that's the average that a lot of universities have, and it's scaled differently, but you're given a certain number of credits to complete. In my case, I had 120, then I got exemption and became 90, but I think on average a lot of students would have 120 credits to complete, and on average they'll have like a 3 credit course, and they do your courses accordingly. And for grades, you have a letter grade that you get every time you complete a class, and that ranges from all the way from a C, that's just a normal pass, to all the way to something like a A, and what letter grade you get and what it corresponds to is different per university. So generally what we call our academic kind of score, overall score, is called a CGPA or a cumulative GPA, and per course you're going to get a GPA, like a grade point average, and that kind of accumulates over time, and if it goes down, obviously like your entire CGPA goes down, and if you keep getting good grades, it keeps rising up and things of that nature. And your percentage mark, the actual percentage you get doesn't really matter. If you fall in a range, like let's say in McGill, if you fall between 85 to 100, I believe you get an A, and different schools have different kind of like strategies for it, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. It's just a nice thing to know. And another thing to know about the grading and the testing schemes in the United States is that the testing is much more consistent. So you get more assignments, and your like I said, there are semesters, so like it's broken down to like 2 terms or like 3 terms or 4 terms, so you have much more frequent testing. People who haven't learned in that kind of like environment, it's definitely going to be a transition for them, but I can assure you that you can survive the transition and do really well in that transition, and that's never going to be a problem. But it's something to know, because you need to know what you're signing up for, like I always say. Now, if you do your independent research about the United States, you see the term liberal arts being thrown around a lot. And just to kind of clarify what a college versus university is, to kind of get that out of the way, what a liberal arts college and a liberal university would be, is that, a college is obviously just smaller than a university. It's like a much more tight-knit community. And like I said before, you have like a stronger student and faculty kind of like connection, because, the student population is small, and, that's literally the only major difference you see between like a liberal arts college and a university that might follow liberal arts. So like that just comes down to your preference of like what kind of classroom you want to envision yourself in. But to kind of like solve the entire mystery behind liberal arts, it's basically where you have a major that you'll concentrate yourself in, but what liberal arts does is it allows you to explore different kind of like fields. And in some universities, in many universities, I think they follow something called a co-curriculum, or they have different variations to it, but generally you call it a co-curriculum, where you are kind of forced to, or rather like instructed is a nicer way to say it, is to take different courses from all sorts of faculty, so all the way from education to psych to bio. It doesn't matter what major you're in, you have to take courses in your core curriculum and complete it. And that's the kind of trend you see in most liberal arts universities or colleges and whatnot. And that's a requirement you just have to complete. I think people have like their battles and like, the pros and cons. I personally have my own thoughts with it, which I will cover in the Canadian university system kind of like video. But I think why the reason why the United States has like, and many universities in the United States kind of like push that kind of culture where people kind of explore with different fields, is that it allows people who don't know what they're doing with their, this is not in condescending way, but they just don't know what their careers might kind of amount to as soon as they enter university, to kind of figure out what problems they're actually interested in and what kind of problem spaces they want to be at. And on a second level, even if you know what you're doing, what it helps you do is dapple around with different disciplines and have like a very interdisciplinary educational experience where you understand how to think in different domains and different problem spaces, like I said. And what the belief is that helps you implement solutions for the world's problems, because you understand the world on a much more general level while having specialized education in a certain field. And it also gives you the flexibility to kind of switch your path if you ever find yourself in like a tough situation where you don't want to follow your major. You see a lot of stories in the United States where people change their majors and they change their careers. Like my best friend Isuru, like he changed his major like 6-7 times, and I personally don't know if I have the same luxury to do so. I personally never needed to, but I think if you're in a position where you want to keep exploring yourself and understand understand very precisely what your career has to amount to, I think the United States is like extremely perfect place to go to, because you get like a large kind of like chance to explore. When it comes to the length of the program, it is generally longer than the ones in the UK, and I even think ones in Australia rather. It generally comes down to about 4 years, and I think that's the same in Canada too, generally. And I personally don't think people should worry about the time taken, because it's like that's just my personal opinion, because the kind of academic experience you have if you have like more time is much more wholesome for some people who don't really know what they're doing. I think if you absolutely know from day one that you will do really, really like great in this respective field, I think doing a 3-year degree might make sense. But I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. So I think like having like a 4-year degree and having chances to intern in different places during your summers and have like flexibility with your course selections and whatnot is like a very beautiful kind of like experience for a lot of people. I know I benefit from it because I also wanted to do like a 4 or 4.5 year kind of degree. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And another thing to note about the United States is that you can't do medicine or law. Yeah, those are the two fields to kind of like note down. But you can't do medicine or law in your undergraduate education. You need to pursue a graduate kind of education. So the timeline changes. I think people stay in university for about 7 years. So you need to do your undergrad or your pre-med, and you need to apply for programs like in med or law afterwards. So that's something to keep in mind if you want to pursue law, because what I've heard is that a lot of people prefer going to the UK or a place where you can finish off your medical education in like 5 years. But people have different thoughts. If you look at like the Making the Right Way podcast, there's one person who wanted to do an MD PhD and finish it off in like 14 years. And Thomas, he spoke about how like how he can graduate med school debt free. So there are different options to take, even whenever you are exploring like different fields in the United States. So this is the general gist of the United States and the education system, and I think it's a extremely beautiful system because you are taught, or like you're put in like a setting where you are given space to think and explore and kind of develop your critical thinking skills for different problems, and it gives you the chance to identify which problems you want to solve personally. So for someone who's an explorer and someone who wants to understand the different fields that exist in our kind of academic space, I think United States would be a very great option. Obviously, things like funding and getting to the United States and the application process is a completely different topic at hand. But understanding the fundamentals of the United States and the tertiary kind of system is an extremely important part in kind of like narrowing down your choices for university. Let me know if this ever convinces you to take up or consider the United States more seriously, but we'll get into the application process much later. Thank you for listening, and I hope this was helpful.